Well, good morning. Welcome to all of you to today's session on the nuclear dilemma with Professor Keith Ridgway. You'll know me, I'm Mike Wardle. I'm the Chief Executive here at CEN, and I'm our chair for today. I've got a few thanks to give and some bits of housekeeping to do before we get on to the main event. But first of all, to thank our sponsors at the FS Club. We're very lucky to have such great support, which allows us to run this series of webinars. We really are grateful to all our sponsors for giving us the opportunity to bring together people to think about issues that are current in finance, economics, science, and engineering. By way of the program today, my job is very much to introduce and get out of the way so we can hear our keynote presentation from Keith Ridgway, and then to moderate the Q&A session that we'll have towards the end of the session. If you do want to ask a question or put a comment in, the way to do so on the GoToWebinar system is to find the Questions tab on the dashboard on your screen, type in the question or the comment, and that will pick that up during the Q&A session. Of course, you don't need to wait for the Q&A session to put your question in. You can do that at any point during the presentation. So please do, if you have a thought, rather than losing it, please do put your question in so we can pick those up towards the end. Those of you who do ask questions will be sharing your contact details with Keith so that if there's any need for any further follow-up discussion or engagement, that can be made easier. We are recording the session today so that if you want to go back and refresh yourself on the content, or you have friends and colleagues who you think might be interested, the recording will be available up on our website in a couple of days. So do watch out for that and share it as you wish. That's all by way of my introductory remarks, other than just to welcome Professor Keith Ridgway, Senior Executive Manufacturing at the University of Strathclyde, and talking to us today on the question of the nuclear dilemma. Keith, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the nuclear dilemma. It's basically, when do we invest in nuclear and what we invest in, and when should we invest? Because I think things were very clear a few years ago, and they've got increasingly fuzzy and been pushed back into the background. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So first, I'll talk a little bit about how we generate power. In the sort of months of January, which was when I sort of wrote this, February wrote this little talk, we generated power from gas, 28-29%, offshore wind was around about 20%, onshore wind was 18%, nuclear was 10%, and then biomass, which has been quite a bit controversy about the biomass from DRAX lately, was around the 7%, and hydro and coal around about 2% each. At that time, and pretty generally, we were importing around about 10 or 11% of our electrical power from Europe, particularly from France, and I think from Norway now. So quite a lot of imports. And there is a bit of a call with what's happened in Ukraine to talk a little bit more about energy resilience and how we ensure we've got supply of energy. But it's not quite as simple as that. The next slide, please. Okay. If we look how we produce electricity, in 2022 is just sort of quite a good baseline figure, really. We delivered by renewable energy of nearly 25 gigawatts. Fossil fuel was 43. Nuclear around about 6, and pretty standard at 6. And a total of capability to generate around about 74 gigawatts of power. So typically, we need on a daily basis around about 50 gigawatts of power. So it's how we make up that power is quite important. People get quite confused really about electricity generation and power and energy usage. When we think about electricity, that is about 20% of our requirements. So we have a lot of energy in home heating and fuel cars, industrial heating. So about 80% of our energy used is outside electricity. But what we're seeing is this transition away from petrol engines, diesel engines into electric vehicles. We try to do more with things like heat pumps and domestic heating. And we're changing the way that we use our power. So what is going to happen, ourselves, we have now electric heaters at home that are very easy to control, monitor the temperature very clearly, and are far more efficient, is that we're using more and more electricity. So we're going to need more than that 50 gigawatts. And estimates range from anything up to 150 gigawatts of power they're going to need over the next few years. So there has to be a considerable increase over the next 20, 30 years of the amount of power that we generate, electrical power we generate. So I think that's the first thing we really need to hold on, that we need a lot more. So the question really is how we provide that. Next slide, please. If you look at what happens daily at the moment, if we say that we're going to use around about 50 gigawatts at any time, what happens every day is that the switch on, or the already running, is the nuclear base load. So around about 5 or 6 gigawatts of nuclear power plant doesn't change. That runs all the time. And the idea of the big nuclear stations, you can't change them very much, is they're on at full load. They're the first thing that goes on. And then you gradually add power stations and eventually go into things like combined heat and power, where you've got ability to change things. In the middle, you've got your renewable energy, which can be on or off depending upon the weather. But then you have a spinning reserve on your steam stations where you can push up the amount of energy that you provide. So as we fluctuate from the day, these additional stations, smaller stations, kick in, kick out, and change the amount of power they generate. And that goes on all through the day. So that's nuclear is the base load at the moment, and probably will be in the future. Next slide, please. So given that UK target for energy, we really got to say what is the government going to do, and what's its target? Well, it set itself a target of 50 gigawatt of onshore wind and then 5 gigawatts of floating wind by 2030. Whether it achieves that is negotiable, really. A five-fold increase in solar power capacity up to 70 gigawatts by 2035. And 24 gigawatts of civil nuclear capacity by 2050, and then 10 gigawatts of hydrogen produced by 2035. But really what's of interest to me, and what we're talking about at the moment, is that very important bit of nuclear, and that's been given the title of 24 by 2050. So the ambition is by 2050, we will have a capability to generate 24 gigawatts of electrical power from nuclear power stations. So forget the rest, they will come on. There'll be offshore wind, renewables, wave power, solar will all happen. There'll be some combined gas, power and gas, but nuclear, there's very clear, is 24 gigawatts by 2050. Next slide, please. Now, back in 2009, if you can remember right back then, we were very, very clear about what was going to happen in the nuclear industry. In 2009, 10 sites were identified. That was Sizewell, Hartlepool, Heysham, Sellafield, Brayston, Stanton, Wolfer, Albury, Hinkley Point and Bradwell. Those were stations that were existing nuclear stations that would be very easy to license. And the idea is, okay, we can put some large nuclear power plant at those stations. There was no talk about small modular reactors at that time. It was mainly all large plants. By 2011, the various reviews and evaluations have been carried out, and 8 sites are identified as the most suitable for deployment of nuclear power stations. That were England and Wales. Scotland wouldn't allow deployment and still doesn't allow the deployment, although they have a couple of stations already, or Tornos are still running. They won't deploy new power stations in Scotland. So we're really talking about England and Wales. And England and Wales, before the end of 2025, they were going to generate from stations at Bradwell, Hartlepool, Heysham, Hinkley Point, Albury, Sizewell, Sellafield and Wilfer. Wilfer is a particularly big site on Anglesey. So everything very, very clear. 2011, probably 8 big power station sites, and probably on 4 sites each going to EDF with the 600 megawatt EPR European pressurized reactor, and 4 going to Westinghouse on a 1000 megawatt advanced power reactor. All pressurized water reactors, very clear, and with the idea was that we would help to reduce the cost of that introduction. And the nuclear MRC was set up, and we were involved in setting that up in Sheffield. And that it was so clear that at the end of the buildings we had Westinghouse going to go one end and EDF going to the other end, and they would both work on reactors, and we would work in the middle on increasing productivity, looking how we could better develop a UK supply chain, make it more available, and bring in new technologies, which are quite hard in nuclear industry, but it's very, very conservative. But 2011, we're all very, very clear. We know what we're doing. As they say in Yorkshire, the job's a good one. Next slide, please. March 11, 2011, the world changed. It was almost like a COVID-type incident, really. Not as bad, really, but it was bad. Earthquake, the 15 meters tsunami, and it hit Fukushima. And Fukushima, 3 reactors couldn't remove the decay heat, couldn't take the heat out. It flooded the cooling water pumps, which were put below the waterline. You know, in hindsight, a design mistake. But the reactors went into meltdown. All 3 cores melted in the first 3 days. And at that point, there were people going on the television, nuclear stood still, and, you know, very respected people said that we would put nuclear deployment back between 3 and 6 months. It was that sort of level, you know. So 3 months later, add on 13 years later, we're still pretty well at a standstill with just Hinkley going ahead, and a lot of uncertainty about the future. Next slide, please. So the argument is, really, the first discussion is, do we need nuclear power? Should we go to nuclear power? And in Scotland, they've said, no, we don't need nuclear power. We won't go that way. And the argument is, no, we can manage renewables. The reason we can manage renewables, and it's better to go with renewables, it's clean, it's safe, it's relatively cheap, but you've got to admit, and it has to be admitted, it has a life of maybe 15 years. You've got problems of discarding the blades, and what happens to the blades after use, probably going to landfill. You've got the wind fluctuations. It's hard to manage those fluctuations. It's hard to store, and quite a lot of them are in, if you go into the North Sea, are in pretty inhospitable environments. So it's not brilliant, you know. If you want to go to nuclear power, it's a fairly simple argument. Yes, it's an important part of our energy portfolio. It's been there for many, many years, since the late 60s. It's been there. We've operated well. There's been one sort of minor accident in the UK, but it's operated quite comfortably. Waste fuel and decommissioning is expensive and difficult to store, so that's a problem. There is a high capital cost of putting a station up, but it has a long life. We're talking of 60 years now of those stations, and it provides a base load requirement. So there is a good argument that, even despite the things that you can say against it, such as fuel storage and the cost of it, there's a good argument to say, yes, we should have some nuclear, but it's difficult, and it's an argument. Nobody can say that it's a straightforward decision. So you've got to ask ourselves, really, you know, what solutions have we got? What could we possibly do? Next slide, please. Looking at what has happened is that we made a decision to go with Hinkley and Sizewell, and 3.2 gigawatts, 2 EPR 600 megawatt reactors at Hinkley Point, and probably the same at Sizewell. If you look at the Hinkley reactors, they're produced by EDF, Framatome, the French state-owned organisations. It's under construction. Sizewell seems the same, almost certainly EDF, Framatome. It's in planning. They're looking for finance. Finance has proved to be quite difficult. We'll talk about it, really. In 2007, when the EDF CEO, Vincent de Rivas, at the said, by 2017 we'd be cooking turkeys on electricity generated at Hinkley. Well, that's not the case. In 2016, the cost was estimated to be 18 billion, and the first set would go online by 2027. So the cost is already 35 billion, and completion by 2031 for the first set. So we're a long way over budget and a long way behind the time scale. So they are difficult, to erect and construct these big stations that are pretty well nearly one-off every time you build them. They're the same model, but there are lots of challenges at every site you go to, and it goes back. Another really important factor is the cost of financing. The cost of financing is 40%, and some people even argue it's higher than that as time has gone on. But at least 40% of the cost of that build is the cost of the money to finance the site. What I find quite annoying really is that when we talk about the proportion of UK content in such as Hinkley, you might say 50 or 60%, but a lot of it is low value items. So the concrete, put the concrete down, the infrastructure, but the main things like the reactors, the nuclear island, the turbines, steam turbines, will all come from France. GE in France producing the big turbines and the generating equipment, and the reactors are coming from Framatome over in France. So we're not getting a lot of value out of it, in my view, and it would be good if we could get to a situation where we can have a power station that we have some value in. So what is the option? Well, one alternative, next slide please, just to say, is the small modular reactors. Now, they are a potential alternative. Small modular reactors, SMRs, are classed as 300 megawatt electrical generation and below. We will have got the Rolls-Royce one that's at 440 megawatts, which is still classed as a small modular reactor, but is a little bit bigger than a small reactor boiler, to be honest. The idea is that we'll build factory-built modules that then be assembled on site, and because you're using that method, it'd be cheaper. You'd have a lower operating cost to put it together as well. The cost of financing would be much less. I mean, you're talking of a fifth of the cost of the big stations. The learning curve is quite an important factor. Is that there is a learning curve there that as you go on, and instead of building one reactor, you're building 16 reactors over a number of years, and you build them in a factory, is that you will get a learning curve, and over the first year you can probably drop about 25% of your manufacturing cost, your actual manufacturing cost, not material cost. And because you're doing a lot of work internally, the impact of weather and weather stoppages, all things that can go wrong with that are greatly reduced. So the idea with a small modular reactor is that we produce a controlled, repeatable process that we can continually produce more and more of them before that learning curve. Okay, next slide, please. So there are a number of SMR designs, and then this now becomes the second dilemma. The first dilemma is, do we go to nuclear power or do we not go to nuclear power? So we've decided that we are doing by 2050. The argument is probably pretty well won now. And then do we go to large stations or do we go to small stations, or small modular reactors, more truthful to say. So do we go to large reactors or small modular reactors? And is there an opportunity to go for a combination of both? And what is the advantage of going to small modular reactors? How do we benefit as a nation from small modular reactors? Well, there are a number of reactors that have to go through what's called the Generic Design Assessment, GDA, and there's about 6 entering that are going through. I think Rolls-Royce is the furthest on at the moment with the 40 megawatt PWR reactor. GE Hitachi's got a boiling water reactor that does 300 megawatts, and that is just about entered it. And that is, I would think, a very strong competitor to Rolls-Royce with a promise to build things in the UK. Altec is on 60 megawatt reactor. X-Energy, who work with Cavendish Nuclear, is a high temperature gas reactor, which is also being talked about. One called Nucleo, UK Atomics, and GE a new cell small reactor. The big two really of that group, if I had to put money on it, I would say the two that are really challenging is the Rolls-Royce and the GE Hitachi reactors. But there's 2 others that are coming to the fore, probably a little bit late. Westinghouse at 300 megawatt, which is a smaller version of their 1000 megawatt pressurized water reactor, and TerraPower. The TerraPower, I think, is very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward, really. But one of the advantages of small modular reactors of building a Rolls-Royce small modular reactor is that we build it in the UK, or we'd hope that Rolls-Royce would use the UK supply chain. They will build the modules. We'll have a very high UK content. But as well as the UK market, there's the opportunity to go to European and world market. So you've got Africa, you've got India, you've got Middle East. Lots of places are going to look for, as we get this energy transition away from oil and gas, for nuclear. So getting to the position where we can not only put it through the UK and the UK regulator and have a good qualified design, but also the opportunity to look out to go for a world market is a big opportunity. Okay, so that really is the next slide. Is the next dilemma is, what does the UK do? Does it go for small modular reactors or stick with gigawatt reactors, big reactors? And there'd be an argument that as you've got more reactors, you need more operating staff, but the cost of finance is massive, so SMRs is better. We are not in the large reactor market. There is no opportunity for the UK to enter a large reactor market. We just can't do it. We don't make the turbines. We don't make we're into submarines. We could do small modular reactors, but we're not in the large reactor market. Could we build an SMR in the UK? Yes, we could. We could build for GE Daiichi with some agreement there. We could build with Rolls-Royce, and hopefully Rolls-Royce will use that market, the UK supply chain. Could we export? Well, there's a very large export market, Africa, India, and we've already got people who would like to build in the UK and finance in the UK. So open the opportunity to take a reactor that they would finance, say Rolls-Royce, into Africa and India, where the big market is. So which one or more do the UK go for? What's the priority? Is it do we generate our own power, or is it really export orders? So is the priority, if it's power, maybe we go for a GE Hitachi reactor. If it's export in the UK, then you go for a Rolls-Royce reactor or some combination. Are we going to put 2 SMRs down as well as the 2 large reactors? When do we need to do it? Those are the critical questions, really, when we need to do it. So the opportunity and the risk. Next slide, please. Rolls-Royce is the only UK design. The question is, will Rolls-Royce use the UK supply chain? And what's the opportunity to do that? I mean, you can't, there's no steam turbine available, so that would have to go from scratch or still use an overseas option. Will Rolls-Royce go to the major manufacturer of pressure parts, which is probably Sheffield Forge Masters and people in the forge industry around Sheffield, or would they look around for more competitive pricing? Would they bring together the modules, or would they go for, as in the submarines, making the major components, the major wells, and bringing things together? We need to decide and build, and they need to prove out, and we've got a good market to prove and win export orders, and that future orders will offset the original build costs. But the dilemma again is, what if we wait too long and we rush, or do we rush into an imported design? So we could go fairly quickly to a GE Hitachi design, or are we waiting and putting off the decision to go for Rolls-Royce? That is critical, and I think we're getting to a very critical point at the moment, is with energy security, with world events, is with the resilience we need. When do we make that decision? When can we generating our own power? And when do we open that market for overseas? We can wait the decision, but unfortunately, other people won't wait. And what I'd be worried about is that if we wait too long with something like the Rolls-Royce design, then the TerraPower design could come, which is a different design, which can track the road. And I think you've already had a presentation on TerraPower. It's financed by Bill Gates. There's no shortage of money on it. If you actually look at what the big power consumers are, where you say steelworks and things like that, it's now data banks and data servers. So people like Microsoft, Amazon, they have the big call on power now. So actually TerraPower, which is financed by Bill Gates, has also one potentially the biggest user of power. So I think there's a danger that if we don't make a decision fairly soon, that some other design will come forward, already building in the US, and then get qualified and take over that world market, and we'll shut down the export market. So I think that is the dilemma, and we need to make a decision fairly quickly. So last slide really is, the dilemma is we can't wait forever. We've waited now, from where we were in 2011 to 2024, we've got Hinkley underway, which under no measure would we say that has gone to successful. It's been, it's a big station that we work, it's great, but it's cost a lot of money as well over time. When do we make the decision? What do we go for? Do we go for an expensive proved design with history of financial and time overruns like the EDF designs? Do we go for an untried SMR design? And if we go down the SMR route, which I would abdicate we do, then which one do we go for? I think from a UK point of view, it's probably fairly obvious, but it is a dilemma that we have to take. So thank you. I'll take any questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that overview, Keith. A very clear exposition. We've got a number of questions coming. I'm going to start with Shane Drinian, who said you touched upon the controversy surrounding the Drax plant. Do you believe that will make a difference as to how we think about the UK full mix? And does it strengthen the case for nuclear?
I think it will, yes. I think, as people dig into that sort of controversy and start looking, where are the wood pellets coming from and what's financing it and what's the government involvement in financing that and how much is that costing, it has to push back and say, well, nuclear is clean, it's green, nuclear is green. There is problems decommissioning and waste. They've got, and I think we're in a different state. I think we are in a different position than we were in the 60s and 70s. We're in a different position now. We know how to do that. So I think it strengthens the nuclear debate.
Jonathan Ford's come on to the question of the electricity demand. Just noting that if electricity is currently 20% of energy needs, and electrification is the main way we decarbonise, isn't 150 gigawatts too low a target? Actually, are we going to need to get nearer to 100% of our current energy usage?
Very, very hard to say how much we'll need, but we're a combination of trying to reduce our engine requirement and a combination of changing the way transition to electricity. So I think people are looking at 150, travelling it. Maybe could go higher, but that's the sort of guesswork people are coming up with at the moment. Is that demand. So if you wanted to go up to 150, if we're using 50 and we've got 70 capability, then perhaps we need 200 to be, round about the level of capability. So we need a lot more electrical power.
Thank you. Sheila McGregor's just asked for clarification about what you mean by civil nuclear. What is the scope of civil as opposed to military nuclear?
Yeah, okay. So military nuclear is, I'm not talking at all about weapons. That's different kettle of fish altogether. Basically submarines. So military nuclear, defence nuclear is submarines, our nuclear deterrent. Civil nuclear is commercial power generation for the general public for heating and so forth. Yeah.
Super, that's very clear. Thank you. Bruce Lloyd has asked a question. So when we talk about the costs of nuclear, whether it's the large or the small reactors, how far are the costs of decommissioning included in the costs we talk about, or is it really the build cost that we focus on?
No, originally the costing was based on the cost of build, and the cost of decommissioning and the cost of waste fuel storage was just forgotten about. That was a future generations problem, This is where I think we went wrong early on. Now that's including the cost. But equally, when we talk about renewables and wind turbines, it's not all plain sailing there. You've got a lot of carbon fibre and you've got a lot of, glass fibre that needs to be recovered or needs to be more often not buried. So you don't always compare the decommissioning. They don't include the decommissioning in renewables quite often, where it is now included in nuclear, I believe. Yep.
Thank you. Just on the question of the way forward, Barry Brooks is asking your view about whether it would be the best option or safer option to go for multiple types of SMRs to avoid the impact of any class defects occurring in any one design. In other words, should we be spreading ourselves wider rather than focusing on one design?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Bruce. Is it? No, that is a very good point, and I think we will. I think we will. We'll go for 2, maybe 3 designs. Hopefully Rolls-Royce will be in there. And I said if I had to put money on it, I would anyway make a decision fairly soon. I would guess on the GE Daiichi reactor, boiling water reactor, and the Rolls-Royce. But the Westinghouse is getting a lot of interest, and I think it's actually got an order up in the northeast. So it just suddenly appeared on the map, on the radar, and that is a relatively straightforward design compared to, its existing technology, basically.
And Jonathan Ford sort of commented about this question about timescales and timelines, saying that GW scale like AP1000 of the EPR are licensed now, as is some of the Korean technology. And the question is, when will SMRs be licensed? When will the first one be built? What's the concern about whether this is really viable in terms of getting ourselves working system in the timescale?
Yeah, the Rolls-Royce one is in GDA at the moment, so you probably 2 or 3 years. So you probably could be going by 27, and on a 4 or 5 year build, you could be, I think realistically 2031, 32, you'd get a Rolls-Royce one up on the grid. You could probably get a GE attach as well. I mean, there is a little bit of debate on when things are going through the US and the Canadian regulator, whether we have to completely do everything again in the UK, or can we do some sharing of information or sharing of sort of a licensing almost. But at the moment, I think it'd very much be with the UK regulator to go through everything. So it'd be 2 or 3 years on going through the regulator, and then probably 4 year build is the sort of argument they're coming for, and then keeping that sort of rate into the future. So realistically, I mean, I would hope that with factory build we can hold the programs on SMR. That's the ambition. Whereas we know that every large reactor that's been built has gone way over cost and time.
Thank you. And Barry Brooks has just asked, are there ways in which the GDA process could be accelerated safely to expedite this process? We were talking about 2 or 3 years. Could that be expedited?
I think so. Yes. I think if we threw more people at it, I think you would. There are only so many slots, so much they can do. I do think they might be able to reduce it by putting more people into that process. Experienced people who can work on the regulation. It's a hard thing to say rush, isn't it? You don't want to rush regulation and safety critical items.
Yeah. And Barry's followed up with a question. Wondering what your answers are to your dilemma questions. So if you had a magic wand, I mean, who needs to take action to drive these decisions, and what's the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's policy. A lot of it's policy. If I had my decision, I'd have made it a few years ago. That's really, I think, where it's boiled down to. But I think we're very, we should make a decision almost now of which ones we're going to go for and go for it. And I think we're probably 2 or 3 years too late. We should have already made that decision. But, we're now talking, well, we're going to make a decision, reduce it maybe by the summer, and then a final finance decision perhaps by about 2029. And, the years pass and years pass. So I think we need to make some decisions and get going on it, frankly. The danger is, and I think it's a very serious danger, is that we're just not going to have access to world markets.
And certainly, as you mentioned, there's other people who really are hoping for a large export market. TerraPower are very bullish about it. Elizabeth Russell's asked, who is involved in decision making? In other words, is this really government level leadership, or are there others who are key to the decision making?
Yes, well, yes. Again, the question, Elizabeth, really. Government policy is important, but as somebody always says, you've got to have somebody who will buy it. Who is going to buy it and operate it? And then the danger is you come down then to EDF and people like that, the owners of the power stations and the sites, making final decisions. So it probably comes back to who owns the sites, who will make the order, and what can the government do from a policy point of view to make that decision happen. So a lot of it comes down to, I think, policy, and they'll all want some finance for the first of a kind, definitely.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about Rolls-Royce, which I'll take together. First of all, Alexander Rottenberg's asked, if we decided to go for Rolls-Royce, does the UK have the necessary skill in the workforce to build a number of SMRs and take this forward? And then the second question is that it's saying that from Canada Whitmill, your arguments for the Rolls-Royce SMR are quite compelling. Have you any idea why, having funded Rolls-Royce for over £210 million, the government retrospectively pushed them back into a competition over SMR development?
Okay. Well, to be honest, 210 million sort of buys the toilet block. When you're talking of nuclear power, it's a splash, there's a drip in the ocean, to be honest. So I think there's got to be a bigger commitment to Rolls-Royce. And that's a very good question about capability. And I don't want to brush over that. It is a very serious question. And it's one we're working on at the moment, actually. So Nuclear MRC has been working on the supply chain and getting companies who are not in the nuclear industry into the nuclear industry, or to understand the requirements of what they've got to keep on data and information into the future, and how they've got to behave in the nuclear industry, the security levels and so forth. So that's important. But when you come to critical items, we don't make a steam turbine now. We lost Parsons and GE. The old days we had Metrovics and Parsons, so on. We lost them. We let them go, sadly. So we're going to have to go to Alstom, GE, or Siemens for the turbine, which is it's a turbine island. You've got the balancer plant and pumps and so forth, but then you've got the nuclear island. The nuclear island, really, the big player in that, in my view, is Sheffield Forgemasters. The Sheffield Forgemasters has bobbed along for as long as I know. I'm from Sheffield, and Forgemasters has been there. They're privately owned and bowled along. And a couple of years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, in fact, I think at the time of the coalition government, they decided that the Chinese were going to invest in it, and the government stopped it, and it continued to bobble along. And then 2 years ago, decided the MOD would invest and buy Forgemasters. So it's now owned by the MOD, who've put a lot of money into building a machine shop, and they've put a bigger new press in. I mean, they can press any reactor at Forgemasters. So Forgemasters would be almost on the critical path and a key player in that. And there is capability around places like Sheffield in the north of England where there is heavy engineering skills. And I go back to the point about levelling up. Levelling up is caused by a reduction in heavy manufacturing in the north of England. So there is the capability up there, and we could put in. And companies like Davy Markham, the site of Davy Markham is a good site. There are good sites up in Renfrew, up in Scotland, that you could build reactors. So there are sites that you could use in the factories. I think there's a manufacturing capability. The critical one to go back to is Forgemasters. They are going to be on submarines. They are making submarine reactors now, submarine pressure parts. They may be the situation where the MOD will say, well, we don't want to do civil nuclear reactors. You're owned by the MOD, stay on MOD work. So it may be that somebody else will come into the market, but it's not an easy market to enter. And the danger is that you go to Italy or Korea for your heavy forgings, and then you've basically lost it. You've lost it. So I think we need to build up the civil part of Sheffield Forgemasters, and we've got a lot of ambition to do things around Sheffield and Scotland, Glasgow, where we've got heavy engineering still.
Sure. Kind of a linked comment, I guess. Derek Kinchington commented. He says to his cousin, who's now deceased, was a senior project manager on Sizewell B, and he remembers the anger when the technology was sold to the Japanese, and when we sold turbine technology to the French. He said, "Not if it wasn't for all this, we might have had 4 Sizewell Bs by now." Did we make strategic errors?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I think if you look, I had a little talk last week at a Bessemer Society about leveling up in heavy engineering. We have lost heavy engineering. We allowed it to go. We whether it be trains, whether it be energy, and climate change and energy production is intrinsically linked to heavy engineering. And when you come to offshore floating wind, come off nuclear to offshore floating wind, where are you going to build the floaters? Where are we going to get the steel? And where have we got the capability to bend 25-meter diameter tubes and 6-inch plate 35 meters high? Where do we have that capability? And we're sadly lacking. And yes, we shouldn't allow our steam turbine industry to go. Tragedy. And our train industry. Don't get me started.
We'll try not to. Henry Thomas, who follows events I know in Asia very closely, has just commented on the development of thorium salt reactors, saying that China is working very hard on this. Indonesia is looking at it, and China wants to build sort of 40 small modular reactors based on thorium to power the entire Belt and Road countries. Where does thorium technology sit with this, and what's the competition like across the world?
Well, there is competition. I think there's one thorium reactor in the GDA at the moment. I would say China, obviously, but from political reasons, people will be turning against China as a supplier. Korea has been very, very successful, and I would think that Korea is, from an overseas point of view, is our major competitor. I think they've done some in the Middle East where they've been on time and on cost. The biggest shipbuilders in the world are in Korea. They understand and can do heavy engineering. So I'm not a nuclear fuels person as well, but there are other options. There are other options.
Okay. Jonathan Ford asked whether we should see all this exercise as an industrial strategy issue, or something where the paramount is to minimise the cost of electricity for users. What if the two are in conflict, and where do we go with that?
No, there's a conflict, and you can see, the argument being, well, I want the cheapest electricity, but I want it to be built in the UK, and well, I'd get my steel from Korea, and I'd probably get my pressure parts built in Korea, and I'll buy my turbine from Germany, and that's right. But no, we're in a dangerous world, and we've already been demonstrated that energy security is the resilience of our systems are going to be really pushed. So I think that from an energy security point of view and manufacturing resilience, we have to build British, we have to have better capability in the UK. And we should go down that route.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'll try and squeeze in a couple more questions. First of all, Gordon de Lamar sort of follows on from that question of industrial strategy to say, isn't it crucial to use UK manufacturer not only for industrial development but also for security? Remembering that Westinghouse built Iran's nuclear power stations in the early 1970s, and changes in politics led to lots of tension over that. So, is there also a security angle?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is a security, national resilience, security of energy supply, and lack. Let's go back to it and be quite honest. Lack of industrial strategy. We haven't had one. For all sorts of political reasons, and we've allowed things to slip away.
Thank you very much. I think a final question, given time, but Candida Whitmill's just referenced the JAEA's HDGR design, which is designed to provide heat up to 950 Celsius. You know, have you come across that, and have you got thoughts about the other designs
No,
that are around?
no. Which one was that? Sorry, I missed that one. Mate.
JAEA, JA's HTGR design. I'm sorry, I don't have any more detail on that.
No, it's not in the GDA. I've not come across it really. No, no.
Okay.
But there will, there will be competitors as we go forward, such as TerraPower. It will,
Yeah.
will come forward, and the new technologies are being developed. And unless we make a decision, we're going to lose out. Lose out.
Thank you very much. And so we are very much hoping that there is a champion out there who will drive forward these decisions and move quickly. We have, I'm afraid, reached the end of time. It's been a really useful discussion. And first of all, to thank our sponsors. As I mentioned before, they allow us to run these sessions and bring these topics into our debates. Looking forward, we've got sessions on Thursday on the Thames Barrier, immediate future or long past, so more engineering for you. A session with Busan on Monday, looking at developments there in terms of their financial development. And then on Wednesday next week, looking at journalism and gathering momentum around the world. So plenty to come up, and do keep an eye on the website for more details. Just remains for me to thank you, the audience, for your attendance and for your engagement in the questions. It's been a great session. And finally, to give our thanks and your thanks to Keith for an illuminating talk covering quite a lot of ground and posing a dilemma which I'm sure we'll all be looking forward to the answers for as we go forward. So Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all. I'll see you again soon.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.